capitalization tables, cap tables as they usually called, you can have nightmares over them. You don't want to have that thing, so let's talk about them. When you have shareholders in your capitalization table, usually when you're doing with startups, you need to have a shareholder agreement, and usually that goes along with the investment agreement as well. So the shareholders need to voluntarily sign that document, and it's not the company law in your respective country which is stipulating these things. It's the voluntary agreement, the contractual law you put together for the shareholders, so that there are certain situations, certain things when you need to make decisions in a certain way. Usually these are coming from the investors, but it's also a good idea to have those between founders if you haven't done that before. This is not a video about shareholder agreements, this is not a video about investment agreements, so that's for another time. Now we're focusing on those nightmares, and you don't want to have them. A few years back, I was involved with a company who had, after a crowdfunding, pretty much like 700 shareholders. It was a private company. It has taken investor money, it has taken angel money, it has taken institutional money, VC money, and nevertheless it had 700 shareholders. And if that would not be all, it was also having a secondary listing. So any given time you could have new shareholders, because the old ones might be selling their shares, and the cap table is a living, breathing thing. Any given moment that can change. So that added complexity as well. And when VCs are saying that they are not really excited about situations where you have done crowdfunding before, what they mean is that if your cap table is not in a way that it enables the company to function, that can be an issue. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad to have crowdfunding, because you can do it in different ways. The way we did it in that particular case was that we had the big existing shareholders agreement between the main people, the founders and key people, and shareholders and investors. And before we did the crowdfunding, we did another set of document, one A4, one piece of paper, where we said, if you own these shares, if you buy these shares, you approve this document as well. And it had only a few things in there. It was not the full shareholders agreement, but it had some of the most important aspects of that. And those were the tag-along and drag-along clauses. So if there's a situation where the company needs to do an exit, and this is usually coming from the VCs, they need to be sure that you can do that. They can do that. And if you have a shareholders agreement which requires everyone to agree on every term by signing, that might be an issue. There are cases where some of the shareholders could not be reached. By some ways, weird ways, they could not be reached. And that holds back the whole process, because you need their signatures. So if you have that type of situation where you have a lot of small investors and they're not part of the day-to-day as actively as big investors, institutional investors, and they're happy to just come for the ride and enjoy from the benefits coming from the hopeful success in the future, then that if you structure your company documents in a way that you have the tag-along, drag-along, and some other important things in a document which goes along with the shareholding. And that's the tiny and only thing needed just to have shares in the company. So this was just one way we structured the company and helping tackle the issues coming with a lot of shareholders, because the company was actually more like a public company in the sense that now you have 700 people, you have to talk with them, you have to keep them informed. How do you do that? How do you run those annual general meetings and get the approval from for the next rounds of funding and whatever the company needed to do in order to move on and progress? So this was just a very scratch on the surface on the topic, which is the huge investor agreements, shareholder agreements. My main message is think further ahead. When you're starting, when you don't have any external shareholders, any investors, think how you're going to do it. Plan how you're going to do it. What is important for you? How are you going to do those things? They are complex issues. They can be really complex issues. They can be more boring issues as well. But please pay a bit of attention to them. Keep them in mind, because they can become roadblocks. They can become big things if you don't pay attention enough, or if you don't have the right people to help you to do those documents. If you just find a lawyer to draft your documents, but that person is not a startup lawyer, is not a person who is being specialized on doing startups and growth companies, that might not actually be the best person to draft your documents. You may not see that immediately, but it will probably come a bit later in the journey. You start to see that the documents are not in place. And if you have too many people there, you have to agree on and change, and usually changing things later on is difficult because you already have something in place, and then you need people to agree upon those things and the changes, and that may happen or may not happen as you desire. So keep that in mind. There are techniques and tactics how to tackle a lot of people a lot of owners in the cap table as well. You could use special purpose vehicles, SPVs, like usually in some of these crowdfunding platforms they suggesting you do, or they actually using as their default option. That's something to keep in mind, but as you see, I'm not making much sense, so it's better to stop here. Stop the cap table nightmares by planning a bit of ahead of time, planning before you take investors, standardizing your documents, asking for help from people who know what they've been doing that for a long time. Talk to your serial entrepreneur who's had done exits, who's been through a lot, who's been facing these issues, so that you can avoid the biggest mistakes and pitfalls which can give you nightmares. Nobody wants to have nightmares. Have a good day. Till next time.